Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya, and today we will take up the issue behind the recent face-off between the United States of America and Russia. US President Donald Trump has said that Washington will withdraw from a landmark 31-year-old nuclear weapons agreement with Russia. Trump accused Russia of violating the treaty and demanded the inclusion of China in the agreement. Meanwhile, Russia has hit back at the US, saying its pullout from the treaty will lead to a military escalation and strike major blow against global security. The Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty between USA and Russia, also known as INF Treaty, was signed in December 1987 by the then US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. It required both countries to refrain from possessing, producing, or test flying a ground-launched cruise missile with a range between 500 to 5,500 kilometers. So what is the United States rationale from withdrawing the INF Treaty, and what does Russia feel about this agreement? Also, what will be the impact of these developments on global security scenario? For more and on this, we are joined by a distinguished panel of guests. Let me start by introducing them to you, beginning with Mr. S.R. Tayal, a former ambassador. We also have with us another former ambassador, Prabhu Dayal, and Smita Sharma as well, Deputy Editor, The Tribune. And we're also joined by Dr. Rajiv Nayan, a Senior Research Associate from IDSA. Welcome all of you to Rajya Sabha TV studios. Let's begin with you, Mr. Prabhu Dayal, to try and understand the recent statement which is coming from the US President. What might be the rationale behind that, since you've seen this closely, you've been there as well? What is it actually that President Trump is trying to convey here?
Well, you rightly said that this agreement had been signed in December 1987 and it had come into effect in June 1988. So it had been working since 30 years plus. The Americans had been complaining from time to time that the Russians were cheating. In fact, they officially complained in 2012 that the Russians were deploying cruise missiles. And their accusations became stronger during the crisis in Ukraine. So what President Trump has made clear is that the Russians, according to him, have been cheating, and he said they've been doing so for years. Of course, as you mentioned, he has also said that a deal of this sort on intermediate range nuclear missiles is not of any value unless the Chinese are also included in it, because the Chinese were not a part of the agreement when it was signed in 1987, but they have been investing very heavily in intermediate range missiles. So from the American point of view, it is necessary to bring them in. Of course, there are many questions which are being raised whether the president can unilaterally rescind on this agreement, because it was an agreement which had been cleared by Congress. So according to his critics, he needs congressional approval. But the president has been well known now for going back on agreements. He, of course, cancelled the Iranian nuclear deal. Of course, that was only a non-implementable, non-forcing agreement. But he also went back on NAFTA, which had been cleared by Congress. I think he has in mind quite the same tactic as he had with the Canadians and Mexico, to get a better deal for the United States. I don't think he's serious about cancelling the deal, although he says that he would like to pull America out of it. But I think he wants to have it renegotiated, because the original deal was signed 30 years ago. He wants to have the Chinese on board, and he wants to make sure that the Russians are not able to cheat in any way. So, of course, this is also great posturing for him in terms of his domestic political scene, because he comes across as the American strongman. America first has been his doctrine, and there is some electioneering also involved, because the midterm congressional elections are around the corner. He is also preparing the groundwork for his own election 2 years from now. So put all together, while he may be getting into a bargaining position with the Russians and also trying to get the Chinese on board on this deal, there is domestic politics, There are many questions which remain unresolved, and I think it will be very interesting to see how things evolve.
Okay, so there is a mix of a lot of factors there as well as Ambassador Dayal has pointed out. Mr. Dayal, if I come to you about the perspective from the second player, that's from Russia's point of view, and if you look at it that way, this is not the first time that either of the two players have threatened to withdraw from the deal. In fact, in 2007, there was a threat from Russia as well, saying that they might also go ahead and withdraw from the deal. But this time around, the Russian reaction is clear when they're saying that this is something which might not be in favor of the overall global security scenario.
I think here we have to distinguish what are the objectives and what is the process, what is the strategy to achieve those objectives. Now, the American objectives, of course, one, that Russia has not perhaps adhered to the deal. Even Obama administration in 2014 had made a lot of noise when they developed this Novator cruise missile interested, etc. But Obama did not do much. Now, whether America only wants that Russia should stop that process, and this is a negotiating position. Now, second objective, of course, is that Russia, this is a deal between Russia and United States, a bilateral deal. Now, as Ambassador Dayal said, China is also developing similar kind of weapons. So, President Trump wants to somehow rope in China also in some kind of a collective deal or a separate deal. But the third thing is that now the President Trump's ear is taken by John Bolton. All reports are that NSA has taken over this entire arms control process from the State Department. There was no interagency process.
And John Bolton is not seen to be very in favor of all these treaties.
Against all kinds of arms treaties, negotiations, even START extension he is objecting to, which Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which needs to be extended next year. He has said no. So, he has his own agenda. So, what is the objective? If the objective is only that Russia adheres to the deal, then this is their negotiating position by President Trump, and he always threatens it, and it has worked with North Korea. He threatened that he will bomb them and annihilate them, but now they are on some kind of negotiating strategy, and they are doing well. Eventually, what happens, one doesn't know, but they are at least talking, North Korea and the United States. And on NAFTA, it has succeeded. At least President Trump claims that all this threatening, withdrawing, and then coming back has given them a better deal. So, whether the objective is really to walk out of the deal or just to make sure that Russia adheres to the deal, we have to see.
Okay, let's bring in Smita here. Smita, according to you, what seems to be the objective here? Walk out of the deal, or maybe extract some sort of concession from the Russians, and maybe bring in China as well on board, if at all that happens, the larger goal?
Well, I wish I had a concrete answer to give to that in terms of whether Trump really wants to, whether he can walk out of the deal or not is a question that all of us know that Trump is unpredictable and very well capable of walking out of. And you know what Ambassador Prabhu Dayal mentioned as Trump walking out of deals or going back on international agreements, what looks as going back to us, the outsiders, is basically Trump sticking to his election rhetoric to his own domestic constituency that he has been playing to. So in the last 2 years, for all the criticism of the outside players, Trump, to at least his own election base at the moment, seems like a man who has been delivering on his promises, somebody who puts that very concept of America first, the American nationalism absolutely above others' interests. Now, in this case also, look, there are two things. There were two indicators. Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, just earlier this month, he told the Senate that it would be very untenable to continue with the INF unless Russia is willing to give up on that Novator ground missile, which has been the trigger point for withdrawal from this treaty. Admiral Harry Harris, who was leading the US Pacific Command earlier in March this year, he also brought up the issue of US's security interests in the Pacific, where he said that if the United States continue to adhere to INF, they are not being able to develop the ground range missile systems, which kind of ties their arms, because China, on the other hand, continues to develop these short and medium range missiles. But there is a counter argument to that by experts, because they argue that nobody has been stopping people from developing sea and air-based defense missile systems if you're talking about the Pacific, and even US's own allies can, very well go and develop these. So that doesn't seem to be a very strong, in fact, point at this. But for Trump, definitely at a given point in time with the domestic turmoil, where all his links with Russia has been under question, the Russian interference in the American domestic election process has been something that is being investigated. Trump would like to be seen as this man who not only postures hard but also keeps his word. So it's very much possible if he does pull out of it eventually. It will take 6 months for it to come into effect, but it also puts at risk the entire question of the nuclear arms race starting again in the region, because while Russians, there is no doubt that they might have been violating the INF. If the Russians were bending, does it serve right for the US then to completely break free and abandon the agreement and thereby start off? Because it's the European Atlantic security which comes into question, which is why the European allies, if you see right now, they have all argued that US must not pull out of INF. This Novichok, the missile that we're talking about that Russia has developed, it can hit at NATO posts across Europe, which is a worry for the United States that is site. But at the same time, the Europeans say that, look, when this agreement was signed after 6 years of tense negotiation in 1987, look at the number of missile heads that were removed. Nearly 2,700 missiles that we're talking about from both American and the Russian side in Europe. So this will bring back the arms race again, which is a major cause of concern at this point in time.
Okay, well, that is what exactly the major point here is, and the cause of concern, as well as Smita put it. Let's bring in Dr. Rajiv Nayan from IDSA here. Dr. Nayan, if we talk about the impact specifically, whether or not President Trump will go ahead and do it is anybody's guess as of now. But then the impact, if he goes ahead and ditches the deal on specifically the point which has been mentioned by Smita here, as to this will give an impetus to or push to that nuclear weapons race within the region. How do you see that aspect? How big can that be threat to the global security scenario as well?
Look, first of all, arms control does not curve or any kind of arms race. When SS-4 or 5 or Pershing missiles were brought under the INF Treaty, basically both the countries had planned to dump their redundant weapons. So basically they dumped their redundant weapons. Will there be an arms race? It is a complex question. Why it is a complex question? Because Europeans who will house all those ballistic missiles, are Europeans ready to locate all these missiles in their territories? Definitely not. If you read, this INF treaty is not just intermediate range nuclear forces treaty, but also short range treaty, which was this short range missile, you can say, or weapon is also called theater missile, because Europe was conceived as a theater. And not only Europe, it is Germany which was conceived as a theater. And I don't think Germany, and it has already pronounced also, that will be supportive of this kind of arms race or deployment of any intermediate range or say short range ballistic missiles. I see it's kind of posturing. I don't think America is going to see any security rationale for development of this range of weapons. It has got much developed weapon. So I don't think it is not going to add any value. Just now we talked about gentleman called John Bolton and someone called Trump. Both are unpredictable and very unconventional, you can say, politicians, diplomat. They have got very different kind of negotiating styles. So one has to unravel their style of negotiations. They want to get some concession somewhere. As Ambassador Dayal has been pointing out about the accusations by the United States for years. And in fact, compliance report of 2014, for the first time, talked about violation of something by Russia, and that is NM729 cruise missiles. They talked about that missile that Russia is developing. And in fact, Russia was also demonstrating some kind of unease with this treaty. And how to just overcome that is a big question. Nowadays, everywhere, even all American analysts, all think tanks are saying that you basically handed over a victory medal to Russians. What Russians were demanding for long, just Trump and Bolton, this team, is going to give it to Russians. So this is, Americans are not going to gain anything, basically, strategically, security-wise. But he has made an announcement. He has got the habit of sounding hawkish. But he may have a something different in mind, objective, which we don't know.
Okay.
It is a billion-dollar question.
Okay, let's bring in Ambassador Tayal again here. Ambassador Tayal, as Dr. Nayan is pointing out, is this a win-win situation for Russia here? Because as I was also saying, and all of us know that in 2007, it was Russia only who said that, you're not adhering to it, so there's no point us adhering to this particular treaty. And this time around, 10 years, 11 years down the line, the United States is saying, okay, fine, we'll move out of the treaty.
Difficult to say, because their deputy foreign minister has said it's a very dangerous development, etc. But it has seeds which will divide Europe. The British Defence Secretary has said that we are solidly, resolutely behind the United States and President Trump in walking out of the treaty. Whereas the noises from the European side, as was said, that Germany, these are all short-range weapons, intermediate-range weapons. They will not be deployed in the United States. They will be deployed in Europe. So the entire logic for the 1987 treaty was because the Europeans did not want these crews and Pershings on their territory. That is one part of the story. But for more worrying for us is that it is somehow bringing China and Russia together. Trump is putting China and Russia in the same basket, that he will negotiate with them. I think that is not good for us, because then if China and Russia start to coordinate their policies as far as medium range missiles are concerned, it's a strategic asset. It's a very, very dangerous implications for India, and for India it is certainly not a good development. But for Russia, the initial reaction says that they are not prepared for an arms. See, Russia ultimately is half bankrupt, or it doesn't have deep pockets. And Trump is very close to the military industrial complex. He is ready to forgive Saudi Arabia 1,000 murders because they have given billions of dollars of orders. And all this new development, ultimately money goes to the military industrial complex. And in that war of money, Russia will lose. There is no question that they will win if there is an arms race. So I don't think it is a win-win for Russia.
Okay, Ambassador Tayal, this particular point which has been pointed out by Ambassador Tayal, that the worrisome part for India would be that President Trump is putting both China and Russia in the same basket while negotiating.
Well, I have a slightly different take on this in comparison with my dear friend, colleague and batchmate, Ambassador Tayal. I think it's good for us if the Chinese are also being brought into this deal, because the Chinese have been investing heavily in missiles, short range and intermediate range, and they have been able to do so unchecked. Now, Chinese missiles do pose a problem for us. We cannot match their missile program because they have much more money to invest. And it is to our disadvantage if the Chinese continue to invest heavily and nobody really bothers about what they are doing. So it's good from our strategic point of view if the Chinese are being brought into question also. Their missile program is being questioned. It is going to be put under surveillance. And if President Trump can have an agreement which involves the Russians as well as China, then I don't think really it's going to be a question of the Russians and the Chinese collaborating, but rather of there being a trilateral mechanism which checks the missile programs of these three countries, and frankly, it suits our strategic interests.
Okay.
And I think I agree with Dr. Rajiv and Smita that there is a tactical aspect to whatever Trump does. He backs out of deals. He says he's going to do this and that. He's going to bomb North Korea. But a lot of it is tactical because it gives him the bargaining chips which he needs. He did that with Canada and Mexico when he said, I'm going to back out of NAFTA, I'm going to scrap it. But he was able to renegotiate it with certain elements being brought in which were of advantage to the United States. I don't think that when he says he's going to scrap the deal, he means that he's going to, in the next few months, deploy nuclear missiles in Europe, but that he is dead serious about renegotiating the agreement.
Okay.
as I have explained.
Okay, let's bring in Smita here on the Russia-China point. Smita, as both our ambassadors are pointing out, and a different point of view coming in from both of them, what's your take on this? Is in this entire scenario, Russia and China being put in the same basket, is that a cause of worry for us, or as Ambassador Dayal is pointing out, that is something which should resolve some of our worries rather?
Well, I'm not going to be the third umpire here and rule on both the gentlemen, but clearly, in terms of China, of course, there are concerns that we do have with China's own missile programs, be it in the Pacific or elsewhere. But China, look here, I mean, it's going to be a little strange. On the one hand, for the United States to be citing as an argument that we want INF scrapped because we are not being able to launch and develop our ground-based intermediate range missiles to match up with China. So there you're looking at China as an adversary that you want to match up with. And on the other hand, then trying to bring China into the realm of this agreement. My worry is, Vishal, that at the moment, Trump, whatever he does on trade with Canada or with Mexico, it's a different ballgame from when you talk about missiles and arms control. It's not the first time. Of course, George Bush in 2001, it was the United States again that took the lead and walked out of the anti-missile control agreement.
And then Russia-China is a different ballgame altogether than Canada and Mexico.
Russia-China are a different ballgame. And the point is, the START treaty that Ambassador Dayal also mentioned, the agreement expires in 2021. And reportedly, Trump, during a conversation with Putin last year, he trash-talked that agreement as well. John Bolton is the third NSA in this 2 years of administration. Bolton is very well known to be against that agreement as well. My point is, where are you heading to if you want to keep scrapping off these agreements, which are not easy to come by? I mean, if this agreement took 6 years to negotiate, what is your plan B if you do go by with the scrapping? And if you're talking with the North Koreans who have seen you walk out of a historic nuclear agreement with Iran without a plan B, if they think that the administration, it's John Bolton who has the years, why should they actually think about serious credibility of any agreement that is being brought to the table? These are larger issues with the United States, with its entire bulldozing of new agreements. I mean, is there any sanctity to these processes or not, is a larger question that also remains as well.
Okay, let's bring in Dr. Nayan again on this. Dr. Nayan, the question, as Smita is pointing out, is more or less on the larger sanctity of all these agreements with the kind of statements which have been coming in from President Trump on almost every sort of agreement which United States might have entered into last few decades.
Well, Trump is known for that. He wants to renegotiate the rules, the regimes of international, community and international organizations. So it is nothing strange. But once we talk about the issue which you have just raised about China factor, and the China factor, I think, is good for us. And if China is really getting into that agreement, but I don't think it is going to happen. It is a very far-fetched scenario, and why would China go for it? So I don't think that is going to happen. So what will happen if China doesn't come? What will Trump do next? What will Bolton do next? I think these are important questions for the international community to ponder over. And Trump and Bolton will keep on talking, say, hawkish. They will keep on talking for a simple reason, what China is doing. China is also trying to somehow reshape international regime, international organizations, all the rules in its favor. So what Trump and Bolton company is doing, it is also trying to somewhat respond to, as Ambassador Dayal said, the possible, fearful, whatever you call it, China and Russia coming together and trying to reshape the new world order. So these are, and new security order. Okay. Both are the situation. 21st, and this is the period. This is a very important phase in history when you have all the rules, all the negotiations, all the treaties, which are, some are 30 years old, some are more than 30 years old, and some are proving to be not very useful, or at least perceived not to be very helpful.
Okay.
When rising power is trying to give it a shape, then another rising power, I'll say Russia, it is not the Soviet Union. So it is also trying to relocate its situation in the international, or position in the international order. Trump is coming, which is not happy with what United States leadership has been doing so far.
Okay.
And it also wants to have its major share in the international system.
Okay.
So all are struggling, and I feel that the broad picture is that there will be some noise made. There will be some posturing made. The final outcome will be not that radical, I say. There will be negotiations. There will be some middle ground. And I don't think we should fear that much.
Okay. Mr. Tile, we're running short of time, but quickly, if you could sum up for us, as Dr. Nayan is pointing out, the final outcome might not be that radical as it looks like from the statements which have been coming in from all sides.
See, President Trump is following a policy of unilateralism and America first. And the recent signs, Vice President Pence's speech, etc., there seems to be a new Cold War coming between United States and China on trade front, strategic front, this, that and the other, artificial intelligence, future. In that scenario, if America picks a battle also with Russia, it is not good for us. They could have gone to China and said that, okay, we have this treaty with Russia. Of course, Russia must comply with that treaty. So you also adhere to it and have a separate bilateral treaty with China. This series of events may force China and Russia to come even closer, and that is not good for us.
Okay. And Mr. Dayal, your take for the situation from here onwards?
Well, of course, as we all agreed, the Americans have for quite some time been saying that the Russians have been cheating on this deal. On their part, the Russians have said quite the same thing, that the Americans are trying to develop bases in Romania and Poland from where they will deploy Tomahawk missiles, and that would be in violation of this treaty. A lot of this is posturing on Trump's part because, as my fellow panelists said, he has been trying to give the impression that he always believes in America first, and that there is some degree of posturing and playing to his base, his radical right-wing base, which, of course, also gels with the fact that he is trying to say that, well, he has no love for the Russians because he is under fire from the Democrats who feel that the Russians intervened in the election on his side. So by trying to put some pressure on the Russians in regard to this treaty, he is trying to annul whatever allegations have been made against him in this regard. Time will show whether he really goes back on it or whether there is some renegotiation. My own hunch is that all the sides involved will sit together, renegotiate, and Europe will exert its influence in this regard because, as Ambassador Tayal pointed out, Europe stands to lose a lot if there is no treaty of this sort and if short-range missiles are deployed on their soil. Okay. If you recall, it was Chancellor Schmidt who made the call for a treaty of this sort, and it was his advice which in due course became this treaty.
Okay, so basically you're saying that ultimately all sides involved will go ahead and sit together and negotiate as well. Let's take the final word from Smita here before we close the show. Smita, do you agree with all the gentlemen on the show as well? And what would be your how would you rather look at it, the situation from here onwards? Is this again going to be a false alarm as far as President Trump is concerned? All will be renegotiated and settled at the end of it all?
Well, I don't think with Trump there is anything called a false alarm. If there could be an unpredictable alarm, but there's nothing called a false alarm. If he's spoken it in Nevada during a rally, of course, a lot of it will be related to the midterm elections next month, and post that scenario might change. But quickly, I think we'll have to see if the US is willing to try and find a middle ground and maybe leverage pressure, some sort of a solution where they say, okay, you modify the range of the Novichok ground missiles that we have a problem with, and maybe we give you access to inspect and see whether we have actually deployed nuclear missiles in Europe or not, Romania, Poland, that ambassador mentioned. If not, I think what will also depend largely is if US is talking about the China factor in the Pacific, whether it will listen to its allies, South Korea, Japan in the region, who are capable of developing these missiles if they have to. What will they will their opinion be weighed in? And Pentagon is going to be important here because so far the Pentagon has been backing the INF. So I think we will also have to wait and watch what the Pentagon feels strongly about, whether it should be scrapped, renegotiated, or how they go about this INF agreement.
Okay, so clearly, as our panelists have pointed out, that there is a lot more to happen as far as this particular treaty is concerned from all the sides involved, not only Russia and United States, but others who have been named, such as China. And definitely, India do have a lot of stakes here. We'll have to keep watching closely as to how all these three major players react to the situation and move forward. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.